Professor Haystacks here. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm not going to do in-depth analyses of the episodes, but I'm going to address, let's see, we've got episode 3, Flurry of Emotions, down to episode 7, Parental Guidance, in brief. Hard to say anything doesn't really fit this pattern. It sort of does, but and I'll address hard to say anything, but at the end. I have not been following the Canadian schedule, so hard to say anything is the last one I have seen so far. Now, all of these episodes, 3 through 7, follow a similar pattern that I've seen some people complain about, in that the main 6 have basically grown up. Some of them see them as being too perfect or whatever, but they act like mature adults. I mean, admittedly, some people never mature regardless of their age, but plenty of people do, and that is sort of the pattern of a lot of these. Now, Flurry of Emotions doesn't quite fit the pattern, but it's close enough that I felt I could address it. In Flurry of Emotions, Twilight Sparkle learns that taking care of a child is not easy. There's a saying that you're never really prepared for a child, and that's a thing. In this case, Twilight bites off more than she can chew and has too much on her schedule and winds up neglecting her charge. It's a very adult problem, now. And she scolded a baby who, she basically yelled at a baby who was incapable of understanding that she had done anything wrong. This does note to an interesting problem in that Flurry Heart is so powerful that she could easily hurt or even kill someone without meaning to. And that is extremely dangerous, and means until she learns to control her magic, she cannot be left alone for any stretch of time, because she might accidentally blow up the house. But that fantastic element aside, Twilight is not having any huge character flaws. It's not like Lesson 0, where she freaks out over nothing and the whole thing could have been solved by simply talking. But in this case, talking would not have solved anything, because she was overcommitted and didn't realize it. And I like this sort of problem, because honestly, I feel like it's a good thing to teach kids. I mean, there's only so many times you can teach them share your toys or whatever. At some point, you got to move on to other things. Now, in the next one, Rock Solid Friendship, I will be doing an in-depth analysis of this, but later. I've got something special planned for that. In this case, Pinky doesn't realize that her way of doing things does not work for Maud. Maud, being shy and possibly on the spectrum, doesn't know how to talk to Pinky about that until she's absolutely forced to, and as a result, Pinky nearly ruins a budding friendship. I also like the role reversal in that we have women that don't like to talk about their feelings. I actually find this as an issue occasionally myself. I don't mind talking about my feelings, and some women I know really do not like to do that. But I digress. This is, again, an adult problem, and one that could be solved by talking, but there's a reason they don't talk, and it's not just social pressure or narrative necessity. In a lot of fiction, what annoys me a bit is oftentimes problems could be solved simply by communicating, and people don't, often for mere narrative convenience, but in some cases, like Lesson 0, there's a social pressure not to. In here, it's not so much a social pressure as it is a psychological condition on both sides, really. Some people say this is the Flanderization of Pinky, and I'm like, are we watching the same show here? Pinky's kind of always been like this. She always rams over people without considering their feelings. She did that in the very first episode, where she threw a party for Twilight without even asking her, including breaking into her home and setting up decorations. I mean, what's up with that? Anyway, next up, Fluttershy leans in. Fluttershy hires experts, and she does tell them exactly what she wants. In an earlier episode, a more flawed version of Fluttershy may have just decided that she was too timid to not accept their suggestions. In this case, however, she does not, and they ignore her and do their own thing anyway. Again, this is something that actually happens, and in this case, really no amount of talking with these so-called experts is going to help. She has to fire them and hire someone else. Now, this is probably the weakest episode that G.M. Barrow has written. Now, that's a pretty high bar, so that's not saying a whole lot. While I liked the lesson and execution in this episode, as a whole, it was not that memorable. It was just forgettable. So now the comics did something interesting with it, but that's another story. Still, I like the way Barrow writes stories for actual problems. Amending Fences was the first time I really took notice of her, because it's a take on problems that adults actually have to deal with, problems that never stop happening, even if you're mature. Now, Forever Philly, Rarity is not clear that Scootaloo is grown. Now, in this case, it's a sister, but their relationship is very similar to a mother-daughter relationship. And this is something parents struggle with, not realizing their kids have grown. I've only been on one end of that so far, but it's an issue. When parents don't realize their kids have grown up and have different likes and desires, it's causes trouble. And in this case, Sweetie Belle tried to communicate but didn't want to hurt Rarity. And in this case, it's not just social pressure. The reason they don't talk about it is because each of them thinks they're doing what the other wants, and both of them have very good reason to think that. While it could be cleared up by communication, their initial assumptions are entirely rational based on the information they have. I mean, most of those things Rarity clearly still likes. The clown ice cream was way too small, but that was the one that they realized at the end still works, just you have to get it in a larger size. Although the original clown ice cream, you'd have to be an infant for that to be enough. All right, I'm getting hot in this lab coat, so I'll try to wrap this up. In parental guidance, we have that Rainbow Dash's parents are entirely too enthusiastic. Now, this, again, is something that some parents struggle with. This is on the other side. This is kind of on the side where I realize parental neglect is a more common problem, but parents that are too obtrusive happens as well. Apparently her dad's name is Bo Hothoof, which, anyway, I didn't catch it during the episode. I also heard someone say the Wonderbolts went around Rainbow Dash, but I mean, back in Storm of the Century, I think it was, whatever the episode where they were trying to make a storm, one of the Wonderbolts just stood there and did nothing while a bunch of ponies nearly got killed. The Wonderbolts are not a great organization. It makes one wonder, and they've fairly consistently been portrayed that way. It makes one wonder why Rainbow Dash ever wanted to be a part of them, but well, whatever. We'll ignore that for now. Because that is an entirely different story. Now, in this case, Rainbow Dash, my problem with this episode didn't come until the conclusion. It's a real legitimate problem, but the end, their answer is that Rainbow Dash is just completely in the wrong, and it's like, oh, it comes off like you should clean your plate because there's starving children in China. Well, they're not going to get this food. Any food I don't eat here has just got to go in the garbage. It's not like it'll keep. So, and if you eat too much, you get fat. But anyway, not only was their cheering very disruptive, in the flashbacks in the past, they were cheering when it wasn't too bad, but in the Wonderbolts, they set off fireworks, which could well have disrupted the flying formations if they were off in their aim, and could have caused a crash or spin out, or the fireworks could have hit someone because they were setting them off right around other ponies, which if you've ever been around fireworks, you know you have to be very careful when setting off fireworks of that magnitude. Small ones you can get away with, but that's a different story. And in at least one other case, their cheering was highly disruptive and actually preventing other people from enjoying themselves. I guess this was also in the Wonderbolt show. In addition to the fireworks, their cheering was so loud and overwhelming, and sometimes in the past, it was actually preventing other spectators from being able to enjoy it. Also, they kept praising her for really bizarre things, which, like, as she put out, how do you measure the goodness of towel hanging? They were too much. Now, granted, Rainbow Dash shouldn't have yelled at them, but it's a perfectly natural reaction to do so when pushed to that extreme. And I don't think she was entirely in the wrong. I mean, she wasn't entirely in the right, but her parents had their fair share of blame as well. But it's like, oh, this other kid, incidentally, we see hints that Scootaloo might be an orphan. Um, this other kid never had parents supporting her, so you should be glad that they support you in every little thing, no matter how overbearing, obnoxious, and disruptive they are. And I don't think that's a good thing. Now, the ending, where she got a private showing for them, that was a perfect solution because then they can cheer as much as they want. They're not disrupting things. Also, them cheering on Scootaloo. Their timing may not have been quite right, as they could have been disrupting the class, but as long as they stopped cheering, like right when the episode ended, it was all right. Because, it was while people were handing in papers, so didn't have to worry about disrupting class then. Anyway, I like this episode up until the conclusion, basically. I hate that where there's that cognitive dissonance. I had a similar problem with Princess Spike, but that's another story. Now, this last one doesn't really fit this theme because we're dealing with children who aren't mature, but in Hard to Say Anything, we do deal with an actual issue that can be faced even by adults, and that is the impression of stories, not just fairy tales, but a lot of fiction of what romance is supposed to be like. And, in real life, it generally doesn't work that way. This episode had its weak points. I guess, Justin Bieber clone was annoying, I suppose. But, it was an interesting joke as long as that doesn't become a pattern. Featherbangs is apparently his name here. All right, yeah. And, some people like big gestures. I should caution that. But in most cases, but if you don't know that that's what the person likes, it just comes off as creepy. The one that was the worst was when they encouraged him to kiss her while she was sleeping. That is sexual assault. Now, he didn't actually do it, but only because she woke up suddenly. I just want to point out that that is not something you should ever do to someone unless you've asked if it's okay beforehand. You shouldn't just come up on someone while they're taking a nap and kiss them. It's creepy, may be considered sexual assault depending on the circumstances. And if they happen to have combat training, you may find yourself with some broken bones. Anyway, I just want to be very clear. Do not do that. I really was annoyed that they both had that in the episode, and while they cautioned that it was a bad idea, they didn't add the point. They didn't emphasize it nearly enough for my sake. I think they either should not have included that or should have cautioned it a lot more. Regardless, back to the main point. Romance generally doesn't work like it does in fiction. It works, it can be great. But the point here is, the ideals of romance vary from person to person, and what appears in fiction over and over and over again may not be what that individual likes. The important thing is to get to know them and get to know what they would find romantic, sweet, or what they would appreciate, that sort of thing. And once again, do not kiss someone against their will. Asleep, awake, whatever. Do not do that. All right, I've ranted on that enough. I may or may not do something similar to this for future episodes. Like I said, I've got something special in the works for Rock Solid Friendship. And I've got another project I'm working on with Artsy Artsy and a ton of, not very low popularity YouTubers. So for the 10 people that might see this, thanks for watching. Hopefully you watch to the end. Regardless, I'm Professor Haystacks. Good night and drive safely. My little pony, something da 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 da. Don't know the words, you are my very best friends. Still have time left, you are my friend.